Good afternoon and welcome to the first of the Southwest Creative Technology Network's Data Talks. My name is Melissa Blackburn and I'm one of the Watershed's producers. And as many of you will know, the Southwest Creative Technology Network is funded by Research England's Connecting Capability Fund. And we're a project which aims to increase the use of creative technologies across the Southwest. We're a partnership between UWE, the University of the West of England, the University of Plymouth, Falmouth University, Bath Spa University, and the Watershed here in Bristol and Collider in Exeter. And since 2018, the network has offered 3 one-year funded programs around the themes of immersion, automation, and data. This year, 2020, is our year of thinking about data. And in April this year, just as lockdown kicked in, we welcomed 24 new data fellows who have been doing some amazing research around data. In particular, the data fellows have been thinking about data ethics and rights, inclusion, and the nexus between data and technology. And we realised it would be great to share some of the learning with our whole network. So this autumn, we're putting on 3 data talks, which will focus on data and social and racial inequality, and reflecting the fact that data and AI and the place of the human within it are really pressing topics at the moment. For our first talk, I am so delighted to say that Natalie Nzeyimana is joining us to talk about how we can imagine and reimagine what we have come to understand about emotions as they relate to emerging technologies. Natalie is a writer and technologist based in London, and she leads strategy at Nuance Technologies. She's an expert in artificial intelligence ethics, as well as a strategic thinker and sociologist. Before we start, I wanted to let you know that there'll be a Q&A at the end, and with the talk will run about 20 minutes long. If you want to ask questions, just pop them in the chat. We'll cajole you to do so, and I'll pick them out later to ask our speaker. For now, it gives me great pleasure to hand you over to Natalie.
Thanks, Melissa. I wanted to think about how we can imagine and reimagine what we've come to understand about emotions. Can we reorient them from the margins of technology, design, development, and research? And what would emerge if we started with feelings as a guide? What kinds of adaptive, intuitive guidance systems might we build? How could they help support collective harmony during, despite, and beyond uncertainty? I'd like to begin this talk by dedicating it to Belly Majinga, Mary Agyapong, and Megan the Stallion. My intention here is to hold space for any Black women interested in creative technology who might be watching, listening, or reading the transcript. This talk is for anyone aligned with the intention of creating freeing, loving, and dreamlike creative technology, anyone aligned with the intention of transmuting the disharmonious energies of fear, shame, powerlessness, resentment, and despair into something other that brings balance within and as a result invites collective harmony and more shared good feelings. Throughout, I'll be asking you how you feel. If you could make a note of the first feeling that presents itself when I do, we'll have an opportunity to share these with each other at the end. I'm working on a client project. The project has many moving parts. One of them, it seems, is about how we measure the good we do. I'm back on the Affective Altruism website with some reluctance. Gita Singer, the altruist, claims effective altruism, efforts that actually help people rather than making you feel good or helping you show off, is one of the great new ideas of the 21st century. Effect is about actually. Affect is about feeling. Somehow, many people who think about technology in the future have created a hierarchy, a binary. This talk, this charting through feeling states, this feeling as knowing and good feeling, is a response to that actually, with love as a guiding force. It's love, actually. Affect, beyond commonly being confused for effect, is a lot of things. According to Google, it's the touch of feelings, it's to move emotionally. Affecting is to pretend to have or feel something. Here, I think of being affected and pretentiousness as Cinderella's stepsisters in a fairy tale where Cinderella is authenticity embodied. Affect in psychology is an emotion or desire as influencing behavior. Perhaps most confusing, to affect is to have an effect on, to make a difference to. To affect, to be effective, contrary to the noble assertions by the altruist, is to affect. Feelings make a difference, actually. In Cruel Optimism, Berlant offers, when we talk about the object of desire, we're really talking about a cluster of promises. We want someone or something to make us and make possible for us, make to us or make possible for us. This cluster of promises could be embodied in a person, a thing, an institution, a text, a norm, a bunch of cells, smells, a good idea, whatever. I wonder if what Peter Singer feels about effective altruism is perhaps what Berlant defines as a cruel optimism, a relation of attachment to the compromised conditions of possibility whose realization is discovered either to be impossible, sheer fantasy, or too possible and toxic. I'm interested in exploring the limitations of a poetics of attachment, like the one the effective altruist puts forward, a set of limitations shared widely across the artificial intelligence community. What remains when we refuse to feel, yet pursue actions aimed at optimizing good feeling outcomes? I'd like to begin with this vignette offered by Lauren Berlant, whose cruel optimism felt like a prophetic precursor to the pandemic. In this contribution to the Los Angeles Review of Books feature on quarantine life, she offers language for the multitudes of feelings which emerge for her. Many of them might feel familiar. These are some of her feelings. The doctors can only do so much, whether or not they even achieve the so much given the scarce resources and competing pools. That is, until occasionally some of the exceptional clarity arrives that might lead to the version of healing that everyone hopes for, to pull this episode into the past as a cause with no effects, except for the memory of expense, panic, exhaustion, relief, solidarity, and a few comic shrugs. The fantasy of the emergency is messianic in that sense, wishing into being a fulfillment that produces a shift with no loss, but a surprising better. I feel better, what I'd give for it. What looked like a dirty suntan was actually a flush in nature. What sounded like coughing was really a story trying to get out. In the end, the police and the docs write incident reports about what mattered and what was lost. Now my body, under torn tents of suffering, unleashes grief from every time I've lived and imagined, perpetually delaying new versions of having my shit together amidst ever reversing lashes of collective time. Back in the day, emergency sped up time. Now it's a fact that produces frustration, flailing, and bursts of thinking about alternate scenarios, not just of singular life and biographical death, but of systems and worlds that reroute paranoia and rage into a positive build. Now, for all of us attending to the streaming crawl, it's all background programs stripping across calendrical metronomes. Well, it is also a doctor drawing forks on the road to show what we might encounter in some future that will feel just like this one until sharply it doesn't. Hearing that, how do you feel? Effect is about actually. Affect is about feeling. Somehow, many people who think about technology in the future have created a hierarchy, a binary. This talk, charting through feeling states, feeling is knowing, and good feeling is a response to that actually, with love as a guiding force. It's love, actually. It's the touching of feelings, it's to move emotionally. Affect is an emotional desire as influencing behavior. To affect is to have an effect on, to make a difference to affect is to be, affective is to affect. Feelings make a difference, actually. I'm on lunchclub.ai, a networking platform I've been using since quarantine. It's a lot like LinkedIn, but far less annoying. You match up with people who have similar interests, and the platform does some AI magic on the back end to schedule these meetings into your calendar. I'm curious if other people struggle to name feelings the way I do. I wonder what fluency around feelings is. I know we're supposed to be networking with a capital N, but all I care about is how people, especially those working in technology, are feeling. This is from MIT Media Lab's Affective Computing Group. The Affective Computing Group creates and evaluates new ways of bringing together emotion, AI, and other affective technologies in order to make people's lives better. Our primary motivations are to help people who are not flourishing or at risk of not flourishing. Our projects are diverse, from finding new ways to forecast and prevent depression, to inventing new solutions to help exceptional people who face communication, motivation, and emotion regulation challenges, to enabling robots and computers to respond intelligently to natural human emotional feedback, to enabling people to have better awareness of their own health and well-being, to give people better control and protection over their most sensitive, private, personal data. Some of our work focuses on making contributions to basic theory and science, including new improvements to machine learning algorithms, while other projects focus on advancing research outside of the lab, with applications aimed at improving the lives of individuals in their everyday environment. From a talk at the London School of Economics. David Halpern has talked about the origin of the Behavioural Insights team. In 2010, David Cameron set up the Behavioural Insights team, BIT, or the Nudge Unit for short, at 10 Downing Street. Plans were greeted with wry amusement from the media and deep skepticism from the corridors of Whitehall. Not many believed it would last, yet within 18 months, the team was producing results which changed the minds of critics inside and outside the government. Headed up by behavioural scientist David Halpern, the aim was to be the world's first government institution to use behavioural science to examine and influence human behaviour, to essentially nudge us into making better decisions for ourselves by applying psychology to policy. Every day, we make countless decisions, Halpern says, from the small, mundane things to tackling life's big questions, but we don't always make the right choices. Behavioural scientist David Halpern also added that seemingly small and subtle solutions have led to huge improvements across tax, healthcare, pensions, employment, crime reduction, energy conservation, and economic growth. Adding a crucial line to a tax reminder brought forward millions in extra revenue, apparently. Refocusing the questions at the job centre helped an extra 10% of people come off their benefits and back into work, prompting people to become organ donors while paying for their car tax added an extra $100,000 donors to the register in a single year. Someone I speak to this week at Lunch Club describes the sales cycle as a roller coaster of emotions. They work in sales for an AI company. For the first time, the tumultuous impact of what's implied with that description is felt. What is it like for people working in sales right now? What does it feel like to sell, sell, sell in the long shadow of late capitalism? It's getting harder, but does it feel worse? Are the highs even higher? Are the lows so destructive that it's impossible to tell? One thing stays with me for hours after our conversation. The sales guy wonders how sustainable dealing with it as a strategy is, and what kind of sustainability that kind of survival could be. When we think about helping or nudging people to make better choices, how do we define, decide, and justify the choices on offer? Which choices do you feel like you have? Hearing that, how do you feel? Effect is about actually. Affect is about feeling. Somehow, many people who think about technology in the future have created a hierarchy, a binary. This talk, this charting through feeling states, feeling as knowing and good feeling, is a response to that actually, with love as a guiding force. It's love, actually. It's the touch of feelings, it's to move emotionally. Affect is an emotion or desire as influencing behavior. To affect is to have an effect on, to make a difference to. To affect is to be affective, is to affect. Feelings make a difference, actually. I remember returning from Silicon Valley years ago and feeling infected with the possibility. Lingering below the surface, however, was an anxiety that came from the somatic, epigenetic, and felt awareness that comes from being embodied as a Black woman. It was only years later, grounded in Black study and more specifically with the language offered to us by Black feminist thought, that I began to more clearly understand the terrain of possibility I could flourish in. It was different, felt better, and crucially, it didn't require a winner to take it all. From Superintelligent Posture. 3 conclusions. 1. At least weak forms of superintelligence are achievable by means of biotechnological enhancements. 2. The feasibility of cognitively enhanced humans adds to the plausibility that advanced forms of machine intelligence are feasible, because even if we were fundamentally unable to create machine intelligence, which there is no reason to suppose, machine intelligence might still be within reach of cognitively enhanced humans. And 3, when we consider scenarios stretching significantly into the second half of this century and beyond, we must take into account the probable emergence of a generation of genetically enhanced populations. Voters, inventors, scientists, with the magnitude of enhancement escalating rapidly over subsequent decades. Neurolink. Neurolink argues the chips will one day have medical applications listing a whole manner of ailments that its chips could feasibly solve. Memory loss, depression, seizures, and brain damage were all suggested as conditions where a generalized brain device like the link could help. Ralph Adolphs, professor of psychology, neuroscience, and biology at California Institute of Technology, tells Inverse, Neuralink's announcement was tremendously exciting and a huge technical achievement. Neuralink is a good example of technology outstripping our current ability to know how to use it, Adolph says. The primary initial application will be for people who are ill, and for clinical reasons, it is justified to implant a chip into their brain. It would be unethical to do so right now in a healthy person. But who knows what the future holds, he adds. Adolphs says the chip is comparable to the natural processes that emerge through evolution. From Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. Technology is miraculous because it allows us to do more with less, ratcheting up our fundamental capabilities to a higher level. Other animals are instinctively driven to build things like dams or honeycombs, but we are the only ones who can invent new things and better ways of making them. Humans don't decide what to build by making choices from some cosmic catalogue of options given in advance. Instead, by creating new technologies, we rewrite the plan of the world. These are the kinds of elemental truths we teach to second graders, but they are easy to forget in a world where so much of what we do is repeat what has been done before. From Sylvia Winter, human beings are magical, bios and logos, words made flesh, muscle and bone, animated by hope and desire, belief materialized in deeds, deeds which crystallize our actualities, and the maps of spring always have to be redrawn, again in undead forms. Can biotechnical enhancements ever be tools for freedom? Which miracles are enabled by technology? Who is human? Hearing that, how do you feel? Effect is about actually. Affect is about feeling. Somehow, many people who think about technology and the future have created a hierarchy and a binary. This talk, this charting through feeling states, feeling as knowing and good feeling, is a response to that actually, with love as a guiding force. It's love, actually. It's the touch of feelings, it's to move emotionally. Affect as an emotion or desire as influencing behavior. To affect is to have an effect on, to make a difference to. To affect is to be effective, is to affect. Feelings make a difference, actually. My writing practice has changed recently. I'm trying to think less and feel more. At first, this felt like a diversion from craft. Now, armed with Alexis Pauline Gumbs' Writing a Ceremony as a guide, I feel the scaffolding and support of intuitive awareness. Writing the Grenfell book has taken years, tears and many moments of almost giving up. Towards the end of lockdown, I became obsessed with Instagram accounts about empathy. Usually run by trained psychologists, therapists, and energy healers, I resonated deeply with the idea that I might be an empath in recovery. It felt like an apt descriptor. Now, having mapped more feelings, I can see how crucial empathy is as a gateway to experiencing, naming, and understanding other felt experiences. Online and in science fiction, empathy exists in corners of care, like those Instagram pages, outside of echo chambers where misinformation is the talk of the day and political infighting manages to miss the glaringly obvious fact that few of us feel good, and that those not good feelings we're sharing are being felt by and in other people. Slowly and eventually understanding this has changed the way I write, both in my work and on the internet. We feel each other deeply, even when we've never met. From Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Talents. Hyperempathy syndrome is a delusional disorder. After all, there's no telepathy, no magic, no deep spiritual awareness. There's just the neurochemically induced delusion that I feel the pain and pleasure that I see others experiencing. Pleasure is rare, pain is plentiful, and delusion or not, it hurts like hell. From Bell Hooks's All About Love. To my child's mind, love was the good feeling you got when family treated you like you mattered, and you treated them like they mattered. Love was always and only about good feeling. Learning faulty definitions of love when we are quite young makes it difficult to be loving as we grow older. We start out committed to the right path, but go in the wrong direction. Many of us learn early on to think of love as a feeling. When we feel deeply drawn to someone, we catechete them. That is, we invest feelings or emotions in them. The process of investment, wherein a loved one becomes important to us, is called cathexis. In his book, Peck rightly emphasizes that most of us confuse catecheting with loving. We all know how often individuals feel connected to someone through the process of catecheting, insist that they love the other person even if they are hurting or neglecting them. Since their feeling is that of cathexis, they insist that what they feel is love. Which feelings matter? What affective states catalyze effect? What are we catechizing? Or what are we feeling? How do we know, feel, and discern the difference? Hearing that, how do you feel? Affect is about actually. Affect is about feeling. Somehow, many people who think about technology and the future have created a hierarchy and a binary. This charting through feeling states, feeling as knowing and good feeling, is a response to that actually, with love as a guiding force. It's love, actually. It's the touch of feelings, it's to move emotionally. Affect is an emotion or desire is influencing behavior. To affect is to have an effect on, to make a difference to. To affect is to be affective, is to effect. Feelings make a difference, actually. Last night, on a call with my best friend from grad school, we think through what natural language processing can capture, what it cannot, or rather, what it does not know how to think to capture, what engineers are not imagining as categories. At the height of the BLM protests in the UK, I was thinking about the violence of awareness masquerading as care. I was trying to preempt feelings of disappointment by posting guides on Instagram for non-Black friends. I was still disappointed. There was and still is something so surreal about being represented and consumed everywhere, but never being seen or heard or felt. I felt like the qualia of our collective Black womanhood was a thought experiment happening without our consent or our engagement. We were dying in the NHS, we were worn out, we were being shot. Things were happening to us and people who weren't us were expertly performing how badly they felt about those things. And yet, like ghosts, the biographical details of our feeling states were lost in the ether, shed only between each other as ephemeral video calls, memes, GIFs, WhatsApp chats, and link sharing. I've shared here an image from my escapades on Instagram and also Pinterest. And I wanted to pause here to kind of ask you to think a little bit about what you're feeling. Are your feeling states limited to that inner circle of happy, sad, angry, disgusted, fearful, bad, surprised? Or are you finding that you're able to tease out more complex feelings that emerge from that? You can keep this, you can screenshot this and keep it with you while we continue the talk. From Glitch Feminism, a Manifesto by Legacy Russell. The question of what is a body as it intersects with our musing on how we might ghost on the binary body presents itself as a question of becoming. In becoming, we shape-shift, deepen, evolve, as we leave the edifice of a gendered architecture. Thus, our movement, sorry, give me a second. Our ability to ghost on the idea of the body, moving away from it, is a key component of becoming. The movement of ghosting creates a generative void that makes space for new alternatives. Becoming prompts questions of who we are, who we would like to be, and triggers a spatial interrogation of what boundaries and how we might break through them. It brings us as well to explore the experience of touch in ways that might transform us. Black feminist theorist and critic Hortense Spillers notes, the question of touch, to be at hand without mediation or interference, might be considered the gateway to the most intimate experience and exchange of mutuality between subjects. It is the absence of self-ownership. This absence of self-ownership is the consent to not be a single being, an embrace of a cosmic corporeality. The digital experience is defined by a touch that breaks limits. It is not a non-existent reality because we live it, feel it, and can be changed by it. As we engage with the digital, it encourages us to challenge the world around us, and through this constant redressing and challenging, change the world as we know it, prompting the creation of entirely new worlds together. We reject the binary, we reject the economy that goes along with it. When we reject the binary, we challenge how we are valued in a capitalist society that yokes our gender to the labor we enact. When we reject the binary, we claim uselessness as a strategic tool. Useless, we disappear, ghosting on the binary body. From The Mattering of Black Lives, Octavia Butler's Hyperempathy and the Promise of New Materialisms by Deanna Long. While all hyperempaths, regardless of race, would experience a similar crisis under these conditions, Black women are assured neither a restoration of their will and desire, nor a discernible end to the crisis. Lauren needs neither the condition of hyperempathy nor the slave collar that bears the marks of the cultural text of slavery. Despite the episodic nature of hyperempathy, Black women's fleshy existence remains a structural vulnerability to violence, a condition that is also a grammar, an unconscious system of rules that marks Black women as the 0 degree of social conceptualization. As such, Black female flesh is a quintessentially productive site of modernity's symbolic order, where the value and meaning of our conceptual categories are both challenged and renewed. Lauren performs this function in the novels as her unavoidable reductions to flesh guide Earthseed's development into a global movement. In this context, Lauren's Black life, or the Blackness of her life, matters, but only in its ambivalent capacity to make all lives matter. Hearing that, how do you feel? Affect is about actually. Affect is about feeling. Somehow, many people who think about technology and the future have created a hierarchy and a binary. This talk, this charting through feeling states, feeling as knowing and good feeling, is a response to that actually, with love as a guiding force. It's love, actually. It's the touch of feelings, it's to move emotionally. Affect is an emotion or desire as influencing behavior. To affect is also to have an effect on, to make a difference to. To affect, to be effective, is to affect. Feelings make a difference, actually. Like bell hooks, I'm aware that talking about love alone, love at all, let alone in heady spaces where we might consider data with a capital D and technology with a lingering Y, this might lose me some audience and perhaps even some credibility. I can feel myself working through that fear, even as I end this presentation. When I talked of love with my generation, Bell Hooks says, I found it made everyone nervous or scared, especially when I spoke about not feeling loved enough. But most folks were frightened of what might be revealed in any exploration of the meaning of love in our lives. I'd like to end with an invitation for us to connect and think through some more feelings together to see what might be revealed in an exploration of those feelings. Drop me a line. I work with founders, technologists, and C-suites to integrate intuitive modalities into the way they, or rather we, build, scale, sustain the emergent futures we're imagining. On Private Publics, with a handful of kind, brilliant souls, we're thinking about and through how to build a different world with and despite technology. We're thinking about privacy, power, and how we realize the future using emergent technologies focused on engaging, supporting, and educating the minoritized communities most impacted by the changes we feel in the present and those we can see coming on the horizon. You can sign up to our newsletter to join us at our next webinar. At Nuanced, we're making our methodological approach to diagnosing, dreaming, and doing available to everyone. We're doing this next month. We developed this approach over years of consulting with clients all over the world. If this talk has resonated with you, you can sign up to pre-order that methodology. I know that this series is an opportunity to think through race and social equality. I have a feeling that the speakers coming through over the next few weeks will help shape that discussion in a way that speaks to the specificities which are important, necessary, and relevant to this current moment. I originally called this talk Feeling is Knowing, how data can galvanize collective and individual intuition. I kind of changed it after the fact because I wanted to really focus on feeling and intuition. I know that these feelings will feel alien, unfamiliar, and possibly even unnecessary for many people in tech. I know that technologists are focused on building solutions with a capital S, and yet we can't solutioneer ourselves out of the human experience. This pandemic has made that clear to us, and I believe that feelings are the answer for what comes next, for the futures we can build, if we're brave enough to move through the forest of feelings we've always known but have never come to know intimately within ourselves. There is an opportunity to build from within, from a deep knowing of self, and through that, a deep connection to others, to peers, to users of the technologies we build, and crucially to the future, as made possible through the shared collective imagination we desperately need to galvanize towards something different. The details of that different are less interesting to me these days. The solution is the outcome of that process, after all. The feelings on the road to getting there, however, fascinating. Love, it seems, is chief among them. Nothing less than love, Alexis Pauline Gumbs prompts us to think. Thank you for taking the time to feel through these questions, ideas, and vignettes with me. We've reached the end. How do you feel? I'm going to pass back to Melissa now.
Well, obviously I'm feeling quite emotional after that talk. I just wanted to say thank you to Natalie for such a very powerful talk. I'm really struck by how poetic that was, as well as how embedded in deep thinking and knowledge, hopefulness, and human connection. And it reflects a journey taken this year as affect and emotion have risen to the surface. So thank you so much, Natalie. I could watch that again and again and get something new each time. It was so rich. I'm sure we're all feeling very grateful to to be here at this moment. So I'm going to try and take some questions from the chat. I think you all need to ask some questions. I've got a couple of questions that I was thinking about. And I was wondering, we think about creative technology and emotion. What's the difference when we think about something like, you were very non-judgmental in that talk. I was very, very, very much noticing that. But when we think about something like behavioural science, which has had such a huge effect on creative technology, what do we think the differences are between behavioural science and really thinking deeply about emotion?
Sure. I know that in academic circles, there's kind of, a tribalism around disciplines. And I'm keen to say that I'm sure that there are some loving, beautiful souls who work in behavioural science. And I'm sure that there's work that is centered on not just transforming harm or transmuting disharmony, but also just kind of thinking about how we can achieve good feeling as a collective outcome. I think ultimately behavioral science actually recognizes the power of feelings. I think it sort of betrays itself at times. It shoots itself in the foot. It sort of says, there are rational outcomes and there's all of these sorts of choices that human beings can make. And I think the way it's being applied in recent years has an element of paternalism, which is quite surprising because it's been taken up by a lot of libertarians who generally don't believe in the state being that paternalistic. But to answer your question, behavioral science recognizes how important feelings are. It just chooses to do something different with it. And I think creative technologists have the opportunity to be really radical with their imaginations about what we do with feelings. And that's the cool. And perhaps by seeing things that people don't agree with in the behavioral science approach, that might help them with diagnosing the pain of the problem. So one of the ways that we work through our projects at Nuanced is we don't just dream, right? We've got to be really clear about diagnosing the pain, and then we try and come up with the most imaginative solution to that pain. And what's shown by the nudge theory set is that it's bringing up a lot of pain to the surface, a lot of people not feeling good about these outcomes or not feeling good about these choices on offer. And this is an opportunity for creative technologists to capture those and diagnose what those pains are. And then from there, start dreaming and imagining really beautiful solutions.
I love the idea of the dreaming. And I also, it's fascinating that we find this a lot in our prototyping, is that people really want to make something. If they can find a behavioural science reason to do that, they'll use that as a justification. But actually we're saying the opposite, aren't we here?
Yeah.
And we're saying that by keying into emotion, we might be better designers and creators.
Definitely.
That's really fascinating. Jaslyn is saying to me that shame and guilt can sometimes be louder than love and empathy. Do you think that impacts our chance in building a more equitable new world with creative tech? The shame and the guilt being louder than love and empathy.
I think what was really interesting, kind of gathering the resources and the wisdom for this talk, was that there are some camps which believe that not feeling good is a bad thing. So shame and guilt, I think, perhaps would fall into those categories. But I think we can not feel good and do good things. And I think it's just a question of, is there space for me to feel my feelings? And if there's space for me to feel my feelings, is there space for me to transmute those feelings into something different? And also, there's a really bizarre situation in the human experience where we can feel despair and hope in the same breath. And we can feel shame and guilt and love in the same breath. And sometimes shame is a trigger to help us understand that we're not feeling loving as we could. Or despair is a way of, flagging to us that we're not feeling as hopeful as we could. So I really think it's about creating safety so that we can feel all of those things. And also for us to create an awareness and an education around emotion that through this pandemic, I've definitely gone through. I think that scrolling through Instagram, getting obsessed with Pinterest and all of these charts has been super helpful, because I had a really binary identification of how I was feeling. It was either good or not good. It was productive or unproductive. And a lot of those feelings map very heavily onto late capitalism. But to answer Jessalyn, I know that with regards to racial and social justice work, I mentioned in the talk that I was posting things for non-Black friends on Instagram, and I was feeling disappointed as a consequence. And then I kind of detached myself from that process and tried to think a little bit about the fact that people are on very different journeys, and the expectations that we place on other people could be quite helpfully reoriented towards a better understanding of our own feelings and a better understanding of where to direct our energy.
And that's the most inspiring thing, isn't it? Is that throughout this dark year, that there is a possibility that people being able to understand their emotions better, and as you say, not have to sit with these very binary choices, which are in a way a product of late capitalism, the happy, sad, the things that where we see things in these very binary ways, that we can see things in a more complex and sophisticated way. Grace says, we've got a question in the chat. Hang on, I'm trying to do this properly. When feelings are dismissed as subjective or inaccurate in tech spaces, how can we keep bringing them in as powerful and meaningful aspects of the process? Did I say that clearly?
Yeah, you did. I've definitely changed my approach with this, and I think the most effective way to deal with this problem is to rally round with other people who consider feelings as important. And if we're constantly putting ourselves in environments where people aren't aligned with our values or our beliefs, and of course it's quite common to be in spaces where there isn't this coherence of values or coherence of beliefs, but where possible, it's a good idea to be with people who are on the same mission as you are. A lot of stuff happens faster that way. And it's also not a good idea, if you are a recovering empath, to put yourself in situations where you're constantly going to be dismissed. Like, it's just not a healthy scenario to be in, I believe. But that's also taking into account that there are certain luxuries that are afforded by a certain end of the gig economy that are not afforded on another end of the gig economy. So it's a question of, what are the ways that we can find forums where we feel affirmed? What are the ways that we can affirm ourselves and our feelings and ground ourselves before we seek validation from other people around our ideas or around the kinds of projects that we want to take on? So one example might be sharing an idea before a draft has been made. If you are someone who really feels what other people think and feel, it's a good idea to get the draft done first, because then you've kind of, gestated that and marinated that idea to a point where you feel grounded with it, so that it doesn't feel like someone's trying to, kill the proverbial baby. They're just sort of saying, here are some tweaks that can be made.
I think that's really inspiring. I love that idea of recovering empath that is in the middle of your talk. I think that's incredibly, quite an inspiring idea, but I think something that will resonate with a lot of people, and particularly perhaps with some of the women in the room.
Definitely.
But as you say, it's difficult to get that balance right, isn't it? About getting your work out there and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And how we manage that as creators, creative technologists, can be very difficult. You're getting lots of lovely comments on the thing from all your lovely, yes. So Foss says, my question re-nudge technology and general academic research. Yeah. How do we bridge the gap between these conversations and the material reality of marginalized people's lives? Yeah. So I'm going to say that again because I didn't read it properly. It's quite difficult reading off YouTube. How do we bridge the gap between these conversations, so our academic conversations, and the material reality of marginalized people's lives? Well, tell me if I've got that wrong.
Yeah. So this is something we think about a lot at private publics with regards to, is the end game to create civic engagement projects or public awareness projects which help people understand the lay of the land? Is the end game that everyone learns to code and is sort of creating like hackable solutions to their problems? It's not really clear to me what the end game is. I think the most important thing is not to feel disempowered. And so I'm kind of gearing towards this idea that the solution has to include, or it would be great if it included, some form of tangible process, resource, tool that actually empowers people. I don't think it's helpful, at least in my experience, to run workshops, and I've done this before and I've just been like, oh wow, that really made the problem worse, where you're explaining to people in marginalized communities, or specifically in minoritized communities, how this new tech is going to make their lives worse. I don't think that's helpful. I also don't think it's necessarily worth lobbying whole groups of academics to believe that it's their responsibility to care about people they've never cared about. I think it's about finding that one academic who's been writing about this for 10 years, but doesn't really have any connections with the creative technology community and probably would love to hang out and talk about how to make this possible. It's about bringing that academic along with the creative technologist who's been working in hacker spaces on solutions which are relevant to this and shares that ethos, along with the community organizer who's been on the ground. You know, it's about getting the people who care about this in different spaces into the same room. And in my experience, that's when magic happens.
We're big fans of collaboration at SWCTN, and that's very important. I suppose the idea of lifting up voices is also really key, and that's what you're saying, isn't it? That lifting up those voices who are already having those conversations but are not necessarily meeting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just reading through Design Justice at the moment, which I'm finding really inspiring as a way of thinking about like how we design processes with people as opposed to for people. Okay. And I also think there's a question of Eduardo Glissant's opacity and thinking about how do we make sure that by engaging minoritized groups, we're not necessarily making them more visible to the technologies that are killing them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real question of responsibility. And if we're engaging with stakeholders who've never thought of those questions, it's far more likely that unintentional harm along those lines will happen. And so it's quite important to pick our stakeholders carefully. And people have to have, in my experience, have demonstrable commitment to the specific outlines, values, and goals that have been set about.
Thanks. I've got one more question. I think I'll get one or two more in. So Becca says, this is so inspiring and it's definitely my journey right now. How do we protect people's vulnerabilities ethically? We just talked about this a bit. How do we protect people's vulnerabilities ethically when feelings are used as a starting point in creating emerging technologies?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a tricky one too, because how do you create informed consent models on feelings you don't know you have? And, you know, I was talking to someone on about I think it was Chipotle, and they were saying that Chipotle can tell when people are about to stop using their services, maybe because they're going on a diet or they've decided to like change their eating habits, etc. And I don't know, I'm just thinking a lot about like the invasion of privacy that happens when companies even have an idea of like happy, sad, you know, just as that binary. There's so much invasion that goes on. And then on top of that, if you add in, you know, committed to a gluten-free diet, and you've got McDonald's being like, no, don't do it. You know, there's something quite interesting about how much information companies already have about our feeling states, even when we're looking at binaries. I think it's a great question. I think that this is one where we do really need to have progressive regulators in the room who are thinking about these questions around how you regulate the ways that companies work, how you regulate the ways that advertisers work. Even though I work in AI ethics, I think that there are multiple ethics at question. So it's always a question of which node of ethics are we looking at? And unfortunately, very similar to behavioral science, there's a sense within technology spaces that you can kind of pick the ethics you like and that suits your purposes and kind of get away with it. And so it's about having ethicists in the room who are going to be quite rigorous and say no, and, you know, push back and say, actually, you can't do that, even though there's no regulation around it, it's wrong. And an end to this conflation of legality with morality would be wonderful, in my opinion.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think we're really seeing that at the moment. And it's interesting that although we're talking here about us all being more aware of our emotions, corporations are already aware of that. You know, it's not, they're not all behavioral scientists. They are ahead of that game in some ways. It's just that we have to regain that space, don't we?
Yeah, and I think there's a real, you know, the hoo-ha in the media about the behavioral science unit at number 10 was quite interesting, considering like most big tech companies have armies of ethnographers.
Yeah.
So it's just like it's interesting that the ethnographers kind of get away scot-free, but the behavioral scientists are the bad guys here. So I think these are the kinds of questions we need to have about like tribalism in academia, which avoid us from kind of looking at things through nuanced lenses.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe the last one. Lots of nice things said here. Does the vocabulary of marginalised groups with different language groups affect the way they are conscious of feelings? The way different colour vocabulary affects the way we can see colours? Perhaps that question is not one that I understand.
I'm not sure
I want to understand that question. And the other thing I wanted to say was that people are saying lots of feelings in the chat, which is really
great. I'd love to hear some, if that's all right.
I'm not going to name any names.
Yeah,
that would be foolish of me. But where are we? Here we are. There was hopeful, pressurized, worried, inspired, and grateful. Interested, inspired, panicked, shame, hope, fear. And there's another one down here. Alienated, hopeful, frustrated, and energized. A lot of really, really strong feelings there.
That's lovely.
It's really lovely. We'll be able to see this chat, I think. Yeah. I'm probably going to wrap up now, because I think we've had some really rich questions, and I can see from the chat that everybody has been really inspired by this talk, Natalie. And I also feel that this is something that we're going to share very widely. I think this is a really key thing for all creative technologists that we work with across the Watershed, but also across the Southwest. And as we think more about, intersectionality, we think more about ethics, coming back to this talk will be really grounding for a lot of people, I'm sure. And it's something that we can use as a sort of benchmark for talking about this stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real sort of joy thinking through these questions and thinking through this topic. And if folks want to continue the conversation this afternoon, I'll be on Twitter at Natalie's online.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. So I'm going to wrap up now. Thank you all for coming. A recorded version of this talk will be available here after the talk is finished. And as Natalie said, she'll be on Twitter this afternoon. You can follow what our SWCTN Data Fellows are up to on swctn.org.uk/data. Our next data talk will take place on Thursday, the 12th of November, that's in a month's time, when Professor Francesca Sabande will be talking about data, race, and the marketplace. It doesn't rhyme deliberately, but it does rhyme. Do join us for that, and she's another really wonderful speaker. All that remains for me is to thank Natalie Nzeyimana again for a wonderful talk, and thank you for watching, and we'll all see you here again next month. Thank you very much.